Up next, Blurrgs, Blurrgs, and more Blurrgs. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Illustrator Modeler. Well, this is a video I did not actually intend to make at first because this particular project was just going to be a painting project and a short one at that. And I was on a bit of a crunch time here to try to get ready for an upcoming online contest, and I think you know which one I'm talking about. As I've been working on the project here, I've seen some interest in these figures, so I figured I would go ahead and give you a look at mine and show you what they're all about. These two figures are of characters from the Mandalorian TV series, Kuiil and Mando riding Blurrgs. And they're really cool looking figures. I just happened to come across them on thingiverse.com, which I'll browse every now and then just to kind of see what's new. So these are available for free as STL files, and you can download them and print them on your 3D printer. They're beautifully detailed. They're turning out to be really nice figures. So I am well into the project now. I've already finished one of them. So let me go ahead and get you caught up with the project right now. And it's really going to turn out to be pretty much an overview of the entire thing, and I'll do a final reveal at the end of the video showing you the completed project. So let me get you caught up here. Okay, so what I have here are two 3D printed sculpts of a Blurrg and the Mando on one, and Kuiil on the other. As you can see, I am well on the way to completing them, and I am in the process of painting and deciding what to do with the cape for the Mandalorian. First, let me go ahead and show you Kuiil. Very pleased with the way he has turned out. Let me show you a shot of what he looked like to start with. And again, what this is a 3D printed figure that you can find on Thingiverse for free. It's been quite popular online the last week or so, and a number of guys have painted and detailed this particular figure. And this is the only one that was available for a bit. It came with Kuiil, or you could print the Blurrg on its own. So yeah, he's just a figure of him riding the Blurrg. Really nice detail. I am continually amazed at the detail that's coming out of the 3D printer. I mean, I've known for some time that you can come up with some really cool prints, but to see them in person is really neat. And to just do this overnight. This took about, I want to say about 7 hours to print. I can't remember, but I just did it overnight, and to wake up and pull the cover off your printer only to find this hanging there. And once you washed it off, you realize, man, look at the detailing and the texture. You can see the skin texture, which is very easy to take advantage of when it comes to figure painting, because there's, it's just there. You just have to bring it out. Now, there is one thing inaccurate about this sculpt, and that is that the nostrils are located on his upper lip, as you see here. And these had to be relocated because if you look at a shot from the TV show, they are located closer to his head. So this was simple to fix, just using epoxy putty and taking some strips of it to first plug up the ones along the upper lip and creating some new ones on the sides of his head as they're supposed to be. Once painted, they blended right in. And a brief description of what I did with the painting. I started off with creating the two-tone look of the creature itself. He is various shades of gray, and for the base color I ended up using neutral gray from Vallejo, and then covered that or dry brushed it with light gray from their Model Air collection, which is a thin down paint for the airbrush, very easy to dry brush onto the surface of the sculpt. And this sculpt is so nicely detailed, it is very easy to bring out that skin texture by doing it this way. Now, as for Kuiil himself, very easy to paint. You've got a lot of folds on his shirt and his pants and clothes, so very easy to bring out the highlights as well as apply the shadows. And on this slide here are all the colors that I used. So this 3D print, it's very similar to the other one. The Blurrg is slightly larger. And if you go to Thingiverse, you'll find that there are two files for this figure. One is labeled small. I did not use that one. Apparently the difference has to do with some sort of tweaking that took place to account for the size of the Mandalorian figure. Yeah, so what we've got here is basically the same sculpt. The mouth is sculpted differently or designed differently. This one has the mouth open. And same technique for painting the leather and all of that, as well as the Blurrg himself. So we're now ready to move on to the Mandalorian here. And I've decided to go ahead and sculpt
a cape out of epoxy putty. My friend Ken Spriggs has been working on these same figures. What he did, because he did not, he did this before this file came out. First there was only Quill available, and then this one came out just shortly after he did his. And what he did was he used another 3D print to shrink down a figure of the Mandalorian. So he did a lot of work on his to create his own Mandalorian figure. So his is a little different, but he was kind enough to provide an extra rifle, because he actually he printed an extra one. He's kind enough to send it off to me, and it is in scale with our figure here. So he also sent me a 3D print file of the cape he has, and that's a very good looking cape. This is going to be a display with the two figures right next to each other, basically the moment when they were talking right above the compound that held Baby Yoda. So the look I'm going for Mando is what we saw in the very first episode, where he still has pieces of what appears to be Shore Trooper armor making up his outfit. On his right shoulder he's got that blue and white paint scheme with the pauldron there, and if you look at what covers his the top of his hands, there are pieces of armor that also appear to be from the Shore Trooper with the same paint scheme. The rest of his armor is a brown color, various tones of brown, and there's a lot of battle damage, so I hope to replicate that look as well. As for the cape, I think it'd be better looking if I just sculpt one that is just draped over him, because they're not riding, and in which case it wouldn't be really moving a whole lot, and it wasn't very windy in that scene, so I think that's what I'll be doing there. And I've only done this once. I only did it on the sash with Mr. Spock, so I'm hoping that my skills will be good enough to create something like that for here. And then we're going to go ahead and mount the rifle onto the cape on his back, because that's really where it rests. It's interesting, I don't blame them for not making the rifle with this sculpt, because it is fairly intricate. But this strap here that holds these cartridges is the strap for the rifle. So we're going to kind of go with that and mount the rifle here. All right, one other thing I wanted to show you before moving on here is a wet palette. This is the first time I'm using one, and I can't give you an excuse as to why I waited so long. But basically it's a way of keeping your paints wet as you're painting, if you're not familiar with this. It comes with this sponge cloth and some special paper. Once everything is nice and moist here, it keeps your paints wet as you are applying them to your figure, and allows you to apply thinner layers as you're doing all of the things that you have to do with the figure. So in between paintings, you can seal it up, and it keeps your paints ready to go for the second round. And I got this on Amazon for about 10 bucks. There are others that you can get that are better in terms of how they seal and all these other things, but I had to go budget this time around, so I went with this one instead. Now the one thing I was told is that the paper this comes with is not very good, so instead I went with the recommendation of some other do-it-yourselfers out there that recommend this Reynolds Kitchens paper, and you wet this for about 10 minutes, soak it in water, and then you put it into your box here with the sponge cloth already wet, and you're good to go. Now the other thing you can do is you can make your own by just using a sandwich box. I did experiment with this a little bit, and you just take a sponge, put the parchment paper. This works well. I'd say the only disadvantage is the height of the box. It's not that big of a deal, but it does give you more surface area to go with something like this, and a lower profile, so it's a little bit easier to reach in for your paints. So what I decided to do before sculpting the cape was to go ahead and paint him first, and I'm applying the paint as if there's not going to be a cape there, because I'm not sure how it's going to drape over, but decided to go ahead and start with this body covering that he's got, and I went ahead and went all the way down to his boots. I know all this is going to be a different color, but I don't mind using this as kind of a base to build from. And so what we've got going on here is Vallejo's Black Brown. And it just needs to be a little bit lighter than that, so I just use some ivory to lighten it up, and it looks like a good match. So I'm going to go ahead and give this some time to dry, and then we'll go ahead and start applying paint to the rest of his armor. Okay, so I'm waiting now for this liquid mask to dry, because I decided rather than painting in some of the weathering to do some actual chipping instead. So I'm going to do this by just applying the liquid mask in these small little areas. You might be able to tell as I'm moving the model around here that the print does come with these areas already detailed. They are indented, and makes the armor look worn and battle damaged. So it's fairly easy to find areas to put the liquid mask into. So I'm going to go ahead now and apply the brown paint on these, and we'll chip away the liquid mask and see how that turns out. Okay, so I'm sorry I'm not really recording much of this. It's kind of difficult to concentrate on painting and trying to record at the same time, so just bear with me on that. So what I've done now is added all the battle damage. As I mentioned before, I was using a liquid mask, and that worked out real well. I think I probably could have done just as good with just a paintbrush, but I'm glad I did it. And along with the chipping, I added some scorching there using some darker shades of brown, and we've got the rest of his suit painted, the gun, and all the cartridges, so he's pretty much done. Now, if you'll notice, this piece here actually has broken off, but I did save it, of course. It's not a big deal. I can glue it back on. I left it off because it was easier to paint the backside of the Mandalorian here, and I think it'll be easier to sculpt the cape without it in place. So we'll put it in at the very end. So I am ready now to sculpt the cape, and what it basically is going to do is reach from his shoulders here back down and just kind of clump up and rest right along the backside here. So again, this is Epoxy Sculpt from Aves, and you start by kneading together parts 1 and 2. The critical thing to leave next to you is some water, because keeping it wet allows you to easily shape and sculpt material. I'm using sculpting tools with tips of various shapes that are great at getting into smaller areas. Otherwise, the rest of the shaping and sculpting was done with my fingers, just trying to keep in mind here how cloth would drape off his shoulders. Well, I'm no Michelangelo, but the cape turned out pretty well, I think. I made it drape over this way, and the ends of the cape are tattered, which is why I designed it like this. And I created a little bit of an imprint here for our rifle. That's where I'm going to mount the rifle here. It should be easy to do now. And I'll extend something that'll look like the strap that comes off his shoulder here. As you saw, it's pretty simple to do. You just have to try it. And the epoxy putty is really easy to work with. You just got to keep it wet. And it's also helpful to have these sculpting tools I found at Michael's. And but mainly just using my hands with gloves to shape it is really the primary tool that I use to shape the cape there. So it's all hardened now and ready to paint, so I'm going to go ahead and paint this up with the brown color that matches the rest of his bodysuit, and then we'll move on to the helmet. Okay guys, here we now have the completed Mando and Blurrg sculpt, and turned out pretty well. I'm very pleased with everything. Ended up using Alclad silver for his helmet. I painted it black first, as they always suggest doing, and I'm glad that it turned out a little darker than a bright silver, so it worked out really well. It's actually aluminum is what I painted that with. So what's next now is to go ahead and get him prepped for mounting onto a display. I have a few ideas for that. Okay, well I happen to have this little box here in my display stand stash, and so it's a hollow box that allows me to drill some holes into them in order to accommodate this little aluminum rod that I am mounting into each of the sculpts here. So I just took my Tamiya drill and drilled a small opening there for this little rod that will fit into place, and I'm just going to use some 2-part epoxy to glue that into place there, and that way it allows the figure to stand properly here. So my idea here is just to have them face each other, much as they did in that scene as they were talking before Mando goes off and rescues Baby Yoda from that compound. Okay, so what I've done now is I've taken the box, the display box, and painted it black along the sides here, and just used some brown as a base coat for the ground cover. And so we're now ready to begin with creating our desert terrain. So I'm trying to use stuff that I have on hand. I have a little bit of this earth texture left, and because there's no hobby shops open. I know I could order this stuff online, but it's all last minute here. So I have some of this. If I don't have enough of that, I do have this mud stuff here. Got some rocks. This came from an aquarium set I had a while back. I just used a hammer to break them apart, and I've just kept them in my stash here all these years. I figured I'd use them every now and then, so that's what they're there for. And that's just to create some added features for our terrain. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, well, I'm excited that I had enough of this stuff. I really thought I would run out. But the cool thing is that you can water it down because it was getting stiff. It was kind of an old container. I cut it open and it was getting pretty stiff. I didn't think I'd be able to spread it, but then, you know, it's something you can add water to thin it out. So I was able to use what I have here to cover the entire base, and had enough to even create a little bit of contour here, which is cool. So next, let's go ahead and put on some rocks. Alright, so I'm applying these rocks now while the material is wet, and that is because this material will act as an adhesive to hold a lot of these in. And once this is done, I'll go ahead and paint it up, and I will show you the completed project here in just a second. So here we now have the completed diorama of the Mandalorian Queel, and let me catch one small inaccuracy before we go on here. By the time the two meet up for this particular scene in the show, Mando had already had his right shoulder pauldron replaced by the blacksmith, which means it should be metallic and not the shore trooper piece seen here. I decided, however, to leave it as it is since I really like the way it turned out, and I don't believe this oversight really takes anything away from the piece. The figures both measure about 4 inches to 4.5 inches in height, with Mando being slightly taller than Queel, and this makes them approximately 1/18th to 1/20th scale if you consider Mando being a 6-foot tall individual. Both of these are again available as free STL files from Thingiverse.com from designer Artspam, who did such an excellent job with these. The detailing and everything is just outstanding, so really my hat's off to Artspam for designing a really nice sculpt, and it is amazing that it's available for anyone to download. There is another sculpt of the Mandalorian, by the way, from which this figure is tweaked from, and you can find this on Thingiverse as well, made by designer Verloc. The links to both of these are provided in the description below. Painting of each figure was very straightforward and was helped along here by the use of the wet palette, my first time using one. It certainly made blending and overall paint application much better and easier, and the results reflect that too. And as noted at the beginning of the build, the one small inaccuracy with the Blurrg creatures are the placement of the nostrils along the upper lip when they should be higher and towards the sides of the front tip of the head. This was easily remedied using epoxy sculpt to cover the original openings and place them appropriately. I'm also pleased with the base. It took me a bit of time to get the color right, but settled on using saddle brown as the base color, mixed with beige brown and sand. Now I started out with a lightened version of the saddle brown, but it turned out way too orange. I then added a misting of beige brown to the mix, and it was an improvement, but it was still too dark. What made it finally come together was a light application of tester sand. In the end, I ended up with a mix of shades which worked well together. And lastly, Mark Fraley again came through with a plate designed with the Mandalorian logo. I 3D printed it, gave it a dry brush metallic look, and I think it adds a nice finishing touch to the piece. So thanks again, Mark, for another nice nameplate there. Now, one last thing I feel I need to mention here is that I've had a number of people ask if I would print and sell these, but I won't be doing that. I actually don't have in mind to sell any prints. It's not the reason I purchased a 3D printer to begin with anyway. I just don't have the time in my schedule to be doing that sort of thing. And in addition, there are complications when it comes to copyright regulations, so it's just best if I avoid doing that. So that's why I won't be selling these. So that is it for this project, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one here shortly. I won't tell you what that is. I'll kind of keep you in suspense, but I've got a few cool things I just received for that particular project, so I look forward to posting that one. And coming up at the end of the week is WantaFest, which again is that online contest. The word's gotten around now to support the good people at Wonderfest who bring us that beautiful show every year. So hope you guys turn out to support them. The registration for the online model contest is already open, and I intend to put some entries myself. So look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. All right, and take care, stay safe. I know we're slowly kind of rolling out of this coronavirus thing. I know we're not going to be out of the woods for some time, but doing the best we can here to keep each other safe. So I wish you guys all the best. All right, take care, and I'll see you soon.